Good evening. My name is Kenny Young, and I'm this year's chair of the VIP Distinguished Speaker Series. The VIP Distinguished Speaker Series is one of the many programs put on by the Undergraduate Business Council for the Red McComb School of Business and for the University of Texas. Today we are joined by Dean Jay Hartzell, Dean of the McComb School of Business, and Rex Tillerson, CEO of ExxonMobil. We will begin tonight with an interview between Dean Hartzell and Mr. Tillerson, and then we'll open up the floor to Q&A from the audience. As a reminder, today's event will end promptly at 6:30 p.m., and we would greatly appreciate if you could refrain from leaving early and using electronic devices. A native Texan from Wichita Falls, Rex Tillerson earned a Bachelor of Science degree in Civil Engineering at the University of Texas at Austin before joining Exxon Company USA in 1975 as a production engineer. From there, Mr. Tillerson had assumed a variety of positions with Exxon domestically and internationally. In December 1999, he became Executive Vice President of Exxon Development Company. Mr. Tillerson was then named Senior Vice President of ExxonMobil in August 2001 and was elected President of the corporation and member of the Board of Directors on March 1st, 2004. He assumed his current position 2 years later. Mr. Tillerson is a member of the Executive Committee and a former chairman of the American Petroleum Institute. He is also a member of the Society of Petroleum Engineers and a trustee of the Center for Strategic International Studies. He is a member of the National Petroleum Council, a member of the Business Roundtable, a member of the Business Council, and an honorary trustee of the Business Council for International Understanding. In 2013, Mr. Tillerson was elected to the National Academy of Engineering. Mr. Tillerson is the Vice Chairman of the Ford's Theater Society, a past National President of the Boy Scouts of America, and a former Director of the United Negro College Fund. He is also a member of the Chancellor's Council, Development Board, and the Engineering Advisory Board for the University of Texas at Austin, where he was named a Distinguished Alumnus in 2007. While attending the University of Texas, Mr. Tillerson was a member of the Longhorn Band, Alpha Phi Omega, and the Tejas Club. So without further ado, please help me welcome Dean Hartzell and Mr. Tillerson.
All right, can you all hear me? Is it working? Thank you very much, Kenny, and Rex, thanks for being here. It's a real pleasure and honor.
My pleasure.
I've been dean for all about 8 days, and I'm really impressed. So many people came out to see me. Thank you all for coming. Let me start off with a little bit about your time at UT. And we were chatting backstage about what the place was like then. Can you talk a little about memorable experiences here on the 40 acres? What do you remember from the time?
Well, as you heard in the introduction, I was a member of the Longhorn Band, a member of the Tejas Club, very involved at the Engineering College with the student chapter of the American Society of Civil Engineers. A couple of 3 highlights that I recall. First, in the Longhorn Band, had the opportunity when I was a freshman. They took a group of only 100 members on a special mission to Peru, Lima, Peru. There was an organization called Texas Partners for Peru, and there had been a big earthquake down in Peru, and an entire city up in the Andes had been buried. 35,000 people died, and they had all of these refugees were afraid, so they had left the mountains and to come into the city of Lima. And there was a huge shanty town of almost 1 million people encamped on the outskirts of Lima. And so a group of people working with the State Department and the state of Texas wanted us to go down there. And, of course, the band was, about 400 members, so they selected 100. I was very surprised that I got to go as a freshman. And it was the first time I had to get a passport. Never dreamed I'd have about 8 or 10 passports now. But first time I got a passport, first time I flew out of the country, ever left the country, was to go down to Peru on what was an extraordinary trip to draw awareness to the plight of the people down there, raise some money from donors, local donors, and we did a parade through the shanty town. They wanted us to go out and actually do something for the people out there, and that was a pretty memorable experience because all these people came out, and there were literally hundreds of thousands of them. Just coming out to see something they had never seen before. So that was a memorable experience, and it made a huge impression on me, and probably was my first exposure in what I have spent my career, almost 41 years, the last 25 years or so, traveling internationally and working in emerging countries to, I think, have had that early appreciation for the plight of human people and what can be done, and what can we do. And it may have seemed small, but I'll never forget the look on people's faces when we just went down there and entertained them for about 15 minutes. So that made a huge impression on me and stayed with me. Tejas Club was a great experience, a group of young men of diverse backgrounds, pursuing different careers, different majors here at college. There were only about 3 engineers that were members. I think we were kind of the weirdos in the crowd. But the Tejas Club, when I was recognized with a Distinguished Alumni in 2007, in my remarks that night when I accepted the recognition, I told people the Tejas Club was this place where whatever you held to be true in your life to that point was going to be challenged, because it was a huge collection of very engaged, intellectual young men who just weren't going to accept that what you said was true. And so we'd have these all-night debates, philosophical debates, scientific debates, political debates, and it was an extraordinary experience for me in terms of learning how to think about what did I believe and why did I believe it, and what were the facts that were standing behind that, and what were just some fundamental beliefs I had from the way I was raised, and learning how to articulate those and defend them. And then learning at times perhaps that wasn't right, and now I got a different view, a different perspective. So those years I lived at the TP over at the Tejas Club were just extraordinarily valuable to all of you know you get 2 educations when you come to the University of Texas at Austin, and only half of them is in the classroom and in the book. The other half is everything else that happens outside of the classroom and the books. And then the third experience, of course, was over at the engineering college, and my, the discipline that was required of me. I struggled as a student. I was not the smartest student in the class. I had to work hard. I had a lot of challenges just with calculus, and I had an extraordinary calculus professor, Dr. Vick, who I think may still be teaching. He's been recognized as an outstanding professor, I know, many times. And Dr. Vick was fairly new to the campus as a professor, and I just was failing miserably at calculus, and I just didn't get it. And I went in to see him, and I said, look, I just don't think I'm going to make it, and I don't think I'm supposed to be an engineer, and I don't know what I'm going to do. And I was just, really distressed. And he just wouldn't accept that. He said, no, we're going to figure this out. You're going to figure this out. And Dr. Vick spent so much time with me when I would go see him, and he was just committed that he was not going to let me fail. He just wasn't going to accept that I was going to fail at this. And so I eked out my C's that I had to have. But I so admire him still today, and I was so pleased that over the years he's been recognized many, many times as an outstanding professor. And of course what it taught me was that, don't ever give up on anybody. Don't ever give up on anybody. You don't know who they're going to become, what they're going to become. I guarantee you Dr. Vick didn't know who I was going to become. So I think that was another, when I reflect back on my time here, there are some things that happen to you that you don't realize the value of them right away, and you don't realize the value of them the first 10, 15 years you're out working. You're busy trying to make a career, you're trying to be successful. And at some point in your life, you do begin to reflect back on, how did I get here, and why did I get here, and what was it? And these are some things from my time here at the university that when I reflect back, I realize every one of those experiences were important to who I ended up being, and why I ended up being, and how I ended up to come to where I am. And so, and those are just 3 examples, and I could talk hours of all the great things that happened to me while I was here.
Great, thanks. And what about as you left? What about your first job? Tell us about your first role outside of UT.
As soon as I left here, of course, I went to work right out of the university here for Exxon Company USA. Now, I'll back up and give you a little perspective because, as you heard, I'm a civil engineer, and I did not intend to go work in the oil industry. I had co-opted and held summer jobs with Armco Steel Corporation. At that time, Armco had the largest steelmaking mill west of the Mississippi. It was a huge complex. They made both scrap iron as well as raw iron, iron ore into steel, ingots, plates, pipe. They made everything. There was a huge facility, and they had, when I graduated, it was a wonderful time to be graduating as an engineer. I had 17 job offers. Engineers were just in huge demand. So I winnowed that down pretty quickly, down to 3 or 4, but in the end it was kind of Armco and Exxon. And I remember I kept telling the Exxon recruiters, I said, look, I don't know a thing about the oil business. I don't understand what you think I'm going to do for you. And they just kept saying, don't worry about it, just come to work for us, you'll figure it out. And they were actually offering me about $100 a month less than Armco was offering me. And Armco was offering me a signing bonus because I had worked there and a guaranteed promotion in 6 months. But I remember going into married student housing the last time I saw the Exxon recruiters, and I told my wife, I said, these guys from Exxon really want me to work for them. And I don't know if it's going to work out or not, but I think I'm going to take the job, and then in a year I'm going to check. And if it's not working out, I'm pretty sure the guys at Armco will still hire me. And so I went to work, got great training from Exxon Company USA, had great early assignments. I just fell in love. I fell in love with this business, and obviously I never looked back, and I've loved it ever since, and I still love it.
So what you hit on a little bit. What advice would you have for students thinking about their first job, if you were thinking things to look for?
Well, I think that what's important is to find an organization that you feel like you're going to be able to thrive in. And when I say that, culturally, I use that word culture, it's going to mean different things to every one of you out there. What I learned very quickly when I joined Exxon Company USA, and I went to work in this very small district in Katy, Texas, at the Katy gas field. At that time, it was the second largest natural gas field in North America. It was a huge supplier of gas to power plants all over the state of Texas and all the way to Florida. And so it was a really big operation, but had a very small staff. And what I learned very quickly was the high standards of ethical conduct that Exxon expects of you. And they drill that into you very early on, and we still do, with our business code of conduct and the expectations that this is just the way we are around here, a high degree of integrity. And what I found in that environment is that when everyone accepts that that's the way we're going to work, it eliminates an awful lot of intramural competition that goes on in organizations because you trust each other. You trust that everybody's working towards the objective to advance the corporation, advance the business objective that you're working on. So I would say, look at the culture of who you're thinking about working for, and as best you can, try to get an understanding. And you can get it by talking to people. And I got a lot from these two recruiters just in the questions I would ask them and their persistence and their sincerity. And I learned later that they weren't like working on commission. They weren't working for a bonus if they got so many of us signed up. They just felt like I was a person that would fit in, and they would tell me that. They said, "You're going to fit in here. You're really going to like this." So I think find a company that shares some of your values is important, because then you will do well. And then I think it's good because maybe some of you know exactly what you want to do the day you walk off this campus. I can tell you I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, other than I really needed a job because I had bills to pay, and I really had to have a job. That was so that was important. But I think the other thing that appealed to me was the fact that they said to me, "Don't worry about what you're going to do. You will figure it out." And then they exposed me to a full breadth of the kinds of things that they need engineers to do. And then they gave me some opportunities to try a number of things. And then I kind of found what I was good at. And then I tended to concentrate in that area. But I wouldn't. And I said, and again, some of you may know exactly what you want to do, and you already have that passion for it, and God bless you if you do. I can just tell you, I think I was like probably the other 99% of you, and I really didn't know for sure what I wanted to do. But then I needed a job, and I wanted to have a job that I felt like I had a future with. So I think it's be open, be flexible. Don't box yourself out of possible opportunities, because you just don't know what door is going to open up in front of you if you go this direction or that. So I'd say be very open to thinking about things that might not otherwise have occurred to you to consider. So,
great, thanks. And I think it's often easy for us to look and see you as CEO and think that the road was not without bumps, absent calculus, right? So can you give an example of something you tried, maybe either failed or didn't go the way you wanted, and how you worked through that and got through that?
Well, I still do that. Everything doesn't work out the way you want it to. I'm going to give you in a broader context, though, one of the, and I consider it a failure. It's not entirely of my doing by any means, but I always feel like I was part of this company, and so we all are part of it. But in the 1980s was the last time we had a very serious downturn in oil prices, a little bit like we're experiencing today. I had hired on, like I said, at the time when there was a huge demand for engineers, companies were hiring a lot of people, and in about 1983, 84, everything went south. And I was in my first mid-level manager's job, where I had about 120 engineers working for me, and I had about 50 geoscientists working in an area where we'd been just really active, spending a lot of money investing, and then all of a sudden, boom, everything just collapsed. And the decision was made that we were going to have to lay people off. And in my 41 years, almost 41 years now, being working for ExxonMobil, it's the only time we ever had laying people off. It's 1980s. And I had to call people into my office, some of whom had joined the company about the same time I did. And we're all in our early 30s and had married and had started our families, and most everybody had kids, 2, 3-year-old families are just getting started. And I had to tell these people they didn't have a job anymore. And it was the most difficult time of my career to have people crying in your office and have to tell them, now we're going to try to help you find another job, but obviously that wasn't easy. The lesson I learned out of that was that we were, if I had anything to say about it, we were never going to get in that shape again. And so over the years, as we have understood and learned the ups and downs of being in a commodity business, we've learned not to get over exuberant at the top of the cycle and get yourself in a position where when it turns, you can't deal with it. And so today, you're reading about a lot of companies having to take layoff steps, and it's very sad for me as a member of this industry. But our situation is when we merged with Mobil in the year 2000, we had 115,000 employees. Today, we run a larger business enterprise, more complicated in more countries, and we run it with less than 75,000. And so even when times were good, we have been on a constant mission of productivity and ever being more productive. And that's what will allow us then to get through this, where my objective is that we don't have to ever have that conversation with anybody again. It's a failure in that we didn't manage that. We didn't manage the business well enough to see that coming.
Well, you mentioned that's a good segue into what's going on now in the industry. So can you talk a little bit about how things have changed, the way you're operating the business today versus a year or two ago when times looked rosier? So how have you adjusted? How are you coping now?
Well, again, I think those lessons we learned back then have really been embedded with our approach to running the business. And so those of us that have been around ever since the merger in 2000, and as you heard, I joined the management committee at the corporate level as a senior vice president in 2001, which was a year after the merger. We have always built this business to be viable at the bottom of the cycle. And so we would take a lot of criticism sometimes from the analysts and others at the top of the cycle that we weren't doing enough, that we weren't being aggressive enough, we weren't taking enough risk, and we just had to ignore all of that. So when you get to the bottom of the cycle, that's when your focus on fundamentals really come to bear. We've always maintained a very disciplined approach to how we invest the capital that the corporation invests around the world. We tested against a broad range of possible outcomes, both in the commodity prices, but also broad possible outcomes around regulatory environments, broad possible outcomes around geopolitical outcomes with governments, so that we want to know how resilient that investment decision is to withstand big shocks that may come about from any number of reasons. So our response in this current downturn is to really have the organization redirect all its attention on the things we can control. And we can't control the price. We can't, we are price takers in the marketplace. So you work on your cost structures, you work on your efficiency, you work on your reliability to ensure that the assets you've invested in are running at a high rate of utilization. Make sure they're being fully utilized. You spent the money, now get the most out of them. So there's a lot of effort put into getting the most out of what we have and then doing it as efficiently as we can. and then finding very efficient ways to put a little capital back into existing assets to get more out of them. Because you got a pretty big fixed cost structure. What you want to do is get more output underneath of that fixed cost structure. That makes you more competitive. And that's where we have the organization really turning its attention today. Is I know we got a lot of great opportunities out there, I tell them, and yeah, I know we invested $42 billion only 4 years ago, and we invested $31 billion last year, so we have, and that's fun. I mean, everybody loves to go out and take on these enormously complicated projects, like our liquefied natural gas project in Papua New Guinea, to our Arctic projects offshore Russia, to all these great places around the world to work, and they are so thrilling when you get a chance to work in these kind of projects. Well, we're still doing some of that, but the other day we announced we're only planning to invest about $23 billion this year. So clearly, we're bringing the investment levels down. Less focus. Let's take this time now that's available to us, and let's focus on the fundamentals, and just control the things we can control. And then I tell my people, please don't lose sleep over this, because I need you to be sharp and productive tomorrow. And come back in excited, motivated. We'll win. We are built to win, and we will win in this situation. That's how we're built.
That's good. That's a good segue. And I was going to ask about leadership a little bit, and it's something that all universities are talking a lot about now, from Chancellor McRaven on our campus to the president talks about we should be training leaders of tomorrow. At the top of a very complicated, giant organization, how do you think about and approach leadership? So how do you think about setting the tone or the values you want in the organization and sort of put that into what you practice every day?
Well, the most important quality that we look for in any leader is their integrity. And integrity is something that every one of you is born with. You didn't go out and learn it necessarily, but when you start out in life, you have a level of personal integrity. And what becomes of it is up to you in terms of how you conduct yourself, the decisions you make, what you choose to do and not do will define your personal integrity. We demand leaders with very high levels of personal integrity because we demand a high level of integrity around our organization. We have a leadership framework which we use to develop our leaders and train our leaders. But it is all grounded in business integrity and ethics and personal integrity and ethics. But we're looking for people then that have the ability to obviously direct people in a way that they are working towards what we call the general interest of the corporation. In other words, it may be that for my particular group that I'm managing, this may not be best for me and the goals I set for my group, but I need to do this because this is what's in the best general interest of the corporation, and that they will always choose that decision. Because at the end of it, we serve the shareholders. And if the corporation is not doing well because we've got people with fiefdoms trying to protect their own turf, then we're not going to do well. So we are looking for individuals who have both the judgment but also the commitment to our broad general interest organizational goals and our objectives, and that they're committed to that. It's important that we have people who can develop other people. We don't use outside consultants in our business. We have developed our own management development leadership programs internally, and we use people internally to teach these things. And so we want leaders that can also develop the talent that we have. We invest a lot when we hire people and they come to work for us, and we invest a lot in their training. We invest a lot in them personally. We have failed if we're not helping each person in the corporation achieve their potential. And not everyone has the same potential, obviously, but we want to understand and assess what is their potential, and then how do we get them there. And every manager in the corporation owns that process of developing their people to succeed to ever higher levels of responsibility. And one day, possibly, they may be working for that person. And that was certainly my experience coming up through the corporation. People that helped me along the way from a management leadership standpoint, one day they were working for me, and they were so proud of me. They were never jealous of that. And so we're looking for leaders that share that trait. because we all know that to the extent our people succeed, the business succeeds. If our people aren't succeeding, our business can't succeed. And so we have to have people that are willing to invest their time and attention into the development of their people as well. But it does, and you're going to hear me come back to this word integrity often because I just don't think we talk about it enough. It starts there. It starts there. If you don't have personal integrity, you can't be smart enough to overcome that. You can't be good enough in anything to overcome that. You must have a high level of personal integrity first and foremost.
Right. You talked about people looking out for you or working with you as you develop in your career. What piece of advice have you heard or resonated with you? So what piece of advice throughout your career have you received you'd like to pass on or you think is worth reflecting on now?
Well, of course, I'm asked a lot, okay, so what's the silver bullet? How'd you get there? And I know you've heard this from other leaders, I'm sure as well. There is no silver bullet. But the early advice I did get early on was on this subject of integrity. The people I worked for really impressed upon me that was vital to my future success. The magic formula for me was I just, from the day I walked through the door, and as I told you, I needed a job because I needed to make some money. And so early on in my career, I just worked hard to make sure that when that paycheck showed up every 2 weeks, I felt like I deserved it, and I'd earned it. And I never wanted to have a 2-week period go by where I felt like I hadn't done what I should have done to earn that paycheck. The second thing that advice that, and I alluded to it earlier too, is that be open to doing whatever type of an assignment somebody may want to ask you to do. I was sent off to do things, and I couldn't for the life of me understand why in the world do they want me to go do this. I have no expertise in it, or it's not even something I'm very interested in. But every opportunity you have is a learning experience. And in a big corporation like ours, the more you understand the intricacies of every job out there that those 75,000 people are doing, the more you understand that, the better manager you're going to be at the next level and the next level and the next level. Because when you then have to give guidance to people or give direction or make strategic choices, you know what you're asking people to do. Because I did that job one time. I understand what I'm asking them to go do now. And so it is an enormously valuable experience to have as much exposure to as much of in a large corporation, as much of that organization as you have the opportunity to do. So I always tell people, be open to anything that they may ask you to do. Embrace that job. Do the best you can. I promise you won't spend your whole life doing it. There'll be something else that comes along. And then the last thing I tell, particularly young people entering the workforce, because you're all very competitive. I mean, we all are at this stage of our careers. You're competitive in the classroom. You're trying to get the highest grade on that exam. And that's good. That's the nature of us. That's what makes us want to be successful. When you enter the workplace, though, you have to recognize you're part of something bigger. It's back to being able to work towards a common objective in the general interest. And I tell young people, please don't be a bulletin board watcher. And what I mean by that is don't get all worried or upset when, Joe Dokes gets this promotion and you all went to work at the same time saying, oh my God, Joe got a promotion and I didn't. I must really be messing this thing up. That's not really how it works. It's, you're not on a semester basis once you go to work. So just, do the task at hand, do it the best you can, do it honestly and with a high degree of integrity, and the right things are going to happen to you. I promise you. And so it's, I always tell people it's simple. Show up for work on time, work as hard as you can, when you go home at night, feel like you did everything you could do that day that was asked of you. Be open to doing anything else tomorrow that they might ask you to do, and everything will work out for you just fine. I promise.
Thank you, Rex. And that was the softball portion. Now we get the curveballs.
Okay.
So we're going to open up to questions from the audience. We've got 2 different mics here, so if you'd like to ask a question, if you want to come down to the mics, and we'll just sort of take turns going back and forth. You want to go first? You're great. Please.
Yes. Hi, my name is Christy Hahn, and I'm a master's in accounting major. And my question for you is, how do you inspire hope and optimism within the company when morale is very low throughout the industry? And do you find it difficult to persuade your employees to be confident?
Well, you do need to communicate in times like this, and I think you do have to be visible. And with an organization that is flung across the world, because we have business activities in over 100 countries. 60% of our employees are not American citizens. They're working in countries all over the world, and a lot of our American citizens are working in countries all over the world. So we use, today we have great communication tools that we didn't have in years past with all of the digital communications we can use. So I can do videos and we can post those, but there's nothing like face-to-face, just like you and me right now. I mean, you're going to feel things from me that I can't convey in a video. So while my team is constantly wanting me to use digital, I didn't grow up that way. So I spend a lot of time on the road. I'm gone about 60% of the time, visiting all over the world and places. And everywhere I go, I try to, hopefully my schedule allows me to sit down and have an employee forum or town hall meeting or something where I can do a lot of listening about what are people worried about, and that gives me a sense then of what is the morale. What are people anxious about so that I can speak to that? I think what I try to help them understand is give them some context for the current environment and remind them we've been here before. And when you work in a commodities business, you're going to have ups and down cycles. And when you get to the extremes of both ends, they're not sustainable. At some point, it gets too high, it's going to come down. If it gets too low, it's not sustainable, it's going to go back up. And to concentrate on what we can, what are the things we control that we can work on, and then get people motivated and focused on what they can work on that day where they feel like they did something about it. And I think that can be very motivational to people because they feel like I can dig myself out of this. And then just give them the confidence that we've been around for over 130 years. This is not the first time we've been through some pretty difficult times, and that as long as we are all working towards that general interest, we are going to be just fine, and we're going to come out of this just fine, and we're going to be as successful as we've ever been, and that, at least try to relieve that anxiety, but try to direct people on what you can be doing. And when you do that, then people get real motivated. Our folks are so smart. I mean, they're just so darn smart, and they're so capable that what I really have to do is tell them. They just want to know, what do you want me to do? What do you want me to do? I'll go do it. And so it's really up to me to try to articulate to them, depending on the group I'm talking to, this is what you can do, and it's within your control. And I need you to do it. I need you to do it, So it's a lot of communication.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Tillerson.
Hello, Mr. Tillerson. Thank you for sharing. My name is Amanda Zhu, and actually I have two questions here. One for yourself regarding your personal career journey, another is regarding ExxonMobil in terms of corporate culture. So my first question is, from what I learned in my current program on human dimensions of organizations, I recognize that actually all types of personalities people with all types of personalities can succeed as top leaders, as long as you have good and strong awareness of your personality. So I just want to pick your mind on what's your personal experience with that, and what's your, how did you develop your own awareness, and, just share some of your personal journey.
Well, I think, and you've touched on what I think is a really important trait of good leaders as well, which I did not highlight, but it is a high degree of self-awareness. And the self-awareness is important because it's not about you, it's how you are impacting and affecting the people that you're working with or trying to lead. And I guess, no one ever really taught me that, although there are some exercises in some of our early management training courses where you go through, 360 type feedback and things, which is helpful. But where I think I gained an appreciation for how important and how powerful self-awareness is was from people I worked for who didn't have it. Because, I look at the people who were my bosses, my immediate supervisors or managers, that I was highly motivated. And throughout my career, I would think about them and say, why did I just want to do, I'd do anything he asked me to do. I mean, if he'd told me to go out and sweep the streets that night, I'd have done it. Because what was it about that leader that had that impact on me? And similarly, I worked for leaders that I had to motivate myself to get in there every day and do what that person asked me, because they had a poor self-awareness and they were not good leaders. And so I developed my own style from those who were highly motivational to me and those who I thought, were just that. So I knew how I did not want to be. And I think it was more important for me to recognize how I did not want to be. Because once I knew what I did not want to be, you take that away and everything that's left is how you want to be. And so it develops over time, and you're going to develop your own unique style as you move up and as you mature as a professional manager as well. But it is something that all of you, as you enter your careers, you're going to go through that. And a lot of people, they get a leader or a boss that's not the way you want to be, and instead of taking that as a learning experience, they let it demotivate them, and they leave, they quit. I'm not working for this person. What I realized early on is this is not forever. If I just need to succeed, and I will move on, and I will work for someone else that's much better, and I always did.
So if you don't mind, do you mind if we go just alternate back and forth, and if you want to come back around if we have time? Is that okay? I'd just like to make sure we give everybody a shot, if you don't mind. But stay nearby, and then if we have time, you can come back up. So please.
Hey, Rex. My name is Taylor. Exxon operates in a lot of countries around the world. A lot of these countries at times are at odds with the U.S. government. For example, like Russia. A lot is made about your relationship with Vladimir Putin. How do you manage your relationships with these world leaders that sometimes are at odds with the U.S. government? And how do you keep all these relationships open for future investments?
Well, one of the things that I learned early on when I began to work overseas in foreign assignments is, and this is not true of all of my competitors, I'm not saying necessarily my U.S. competitors, but my foreign competitors, was to make sure that host governments, resource owners, and whether it's Russia or Yemen or wherever, the Middle East, make sure they understand that I'm not the U.S. government. I am an American company, and I will be bound by the laws of the United States and other countries, and I'm going to follow those laws. But I'm not here to represent the United States government's interest. I'm not here to defend it, nor am I here to criticize it. That's not what I do. I'm a businessman. And you would be surprised how many times I've had to have that conversation with heads of state who want to say to me, well, look, I know you can have some influence on the president. I need you to go back and tell him this. Okay? And there's only been 2 occasions where I did that because it was a matter of national security. And they did not know how to get a message to the White House. So I did it. So my relationship with Vladimir Putin, which dates back almost 15 years now, I've known him since 1999, and I have a very close relationship with him. I don't agree with everything he's doing. I don't agree with everything a lot of leaders are doing. But he understands that I'm a businessman. And I've invested a lot of money, our company has invested a lot of money in Russia very successfully. Our Russian workforce is 98.5% Russian national. They're magnificent employees. I mean, I admire them greatly in terms of what they're able to do. And he knows that us being there has caused good things to happen for them, and that we've been a positive force. And so we've got the sanctions in place right now, and he understands I'm going to comply with the sanctions. There's not any conversation otherwise about that. And they recognize that. The first time I went over to see them after the sanctions were in place, I was a little nervous, wasn't sure. And it was interesting because the first question they asked me is, well, how are you doing? Are you okay? And I said, well, yeah, I'm fine. Why do you ask? They said, well, we just wondered whether your government was coming after you because you've been doing business with us. So they were more worried about me and so they understood. We understand you can't do certain things now. And what I tell them is, we're not going anywhere. We've been around 130 years. When the sanctions are over, we'll all sit down and get back to work. And until then, we just have to comply with the law. So most of the leaders I deal with, I just have that kind of very open, frank conversation with them.
Thanks.
Good afternoon, Mr. Tillerson. My name is Andres Morales, and I was wondering, being the CEO of ExxonMobil, one of the biggest oil corporations, when you have a personal setback, what are the steps that you take towards overcoming them? What do you do personally?
If I have a personal setback?
Yes.
Well, obviously, depending on what the nature of it is, I look at the situation and do what I can to mitigate whatever negative effects or aspects there are of that, whether it's something personally at home, because work-life balance is a real challenge for people like me that are gone 60% of the time, or whether it's a personal setback in a relationship with a foreign government, and I've been through some of those, is to step back. And being an engineer, I'm an analytical person, and I try to analyze the situation and what is really going on here. I try to understand what is really at the root of what happened here, and what can I do to mitigate that, and what can I do to repair it if it's a relationship that's been damaged with another government or inside my company or at home. What do I need to do? And then deal with it as quickly as I can, and then move on. The worst thing you can do is carry those bags around. I tell you, they get real heavy the longer you carry them around. And my lesson in life has been deal with it as quickly as you can, deal with it honestly, openly, sincerely, and sometimes people can't get over it. And if they don't get over it, then I got to move on. I got to move on, and I'm going to move on. I've done what I can do.
Thank you.
Hello, Mr. Tillerson. I'm Jason Yao. My question is, what do you think of Shell's BG merger, and how do you think this will affect your company?
Well, there's been a lot written about it. I'm sure you've read most of that. We'll have to see how it works out for them. The timing, I'm sure, is not what, in terms of where we are in this cycle, is not what they had certainly anticipated. None of us are smart enough to know when these commodity cycle turns are going to happen. BG has, they have some great resource assets. They do have some very attractive resource assets in Brazil, off the coast of Africa, and they have a very large liquefied natural gas business, which was really the attraction for Shell, who also has a large LNG business, was to put those two together. Both of those companies, BG and Shell, run very large LNG trading platforms, which generate a lot of revenue for them, and I think they see a lot of the value is in putting those two trading platforms together and then making them more efficient, taking a lot of the overhead cost out of those trading platforms. We don't do trading. We never have. Stayed out of it. So I don't want to speak to how I think that may work out itself. I think the challenge for any merger that's the size of these two, because while you might not characterize it as a merger of equals, both those organizations were very successful of their own right. They've been around a long time. They have their own culture. Is getting those two put together successfully. Having been through the Exxon and Mobil merger, and when I reflect on it, I think it's one of the most remarkable business case study successes in the history of corporate mergers. And being part of it, there's a lot of reasons why that happened, and there's a lot of ways it could have gone wrong and it didn't. So we'll see how. I think that's the real test for them, is going to be the ability to put those two organizations together and merge those cultures. So how it works out, time will tell.
Thank you.
Hi, Michael Yetter, first year MBA, big fan. So my question is a little long-winded, so bear with me. So some people believe that the recent downturn is caused by the U.S. production increase due to the shale revolution, as well as drilling and production technologies advancements. So if these technologies and that trend actually is just now reaching other foreign nations, and so when we do bounce back, what is keeping, other nations to cause the same kind of effect that we had? And what can we do to really kind of prevent this happening again, but in a different location?
Well, it will happen again because that's the nature of commodity cycles. But let me talk broadly about the situation we're in. And you are correct that the explosion of the shale revolution in North America is a big component of what happened. But it wasn't just the increasing volumes from U.S. Canadian tight oil. There were, as I mentioned, we were at a peak of investment levels back in 2013, over $42 billion a year we were investing. That was kind of going on across the industry. So there was a lot of new capacity being developed in deep water development systems, offshore Africa, in Arctic locations, deep water Gulf of Mexico, in the oil sands in Canada, all stimulated by this market signal that we were getting in the form of a price. That growing volume and the North America piece was a significant and very visible piece of it because it was coming on very quickly. 1 million barrels a day per year or more. 5 million barrels a day over the last 5 years. So you have that running headlong into a global economy that is not doing all that great, a U.S. economy that's pretty mediocre, a European economy that's basically sliding sideways, and a Chinese economy that's changing its rate of growth from 8% down to now sub-7 and probably correcting down, all of which was to be expected. So all of that just collides all at one time, and that's when you have this enormous collapse then that occurred, along with the decision, and I think it was the right decision for OPEC, it was the right decision for them, that they were not going to try to manage that collapse, that they were just going to keep going for the time being. Now your question of, so how do you get out of this and why isn't it just going to do it again is a good question. First and foremost, just because there is enormous resource capacity in the U.S. and Canada that has not yet been developed. And we know where it is, we know how to do it, and not only that, we know how to do it better than we did the last one. And so first you've got just the price signal that the U.S. producer will get at some point that will stimulate people to get back at just developing what we have here. Around the world, there's really only one other tight oil basin that looks promising and has similar characteristics to North America, and that's in Argentina. Now, there is a lot of unconventional shale and tight oil potential all over the world. What made it work in the United States is most of that was in areas where we had existing infrastructure from long-standing conventional production. So we had pipelines already in place, we had people who knew how to do this, we had equipment, we had production facilities, and we had refineries nearby. And we have private land ownership and private mineral ownership. The United States is the only country in the world that has private mineral ownership. All other countries in the world, the minerals are owned by the state. So you had some natural competitive and entrepreneurial forces at work in the U.S. that will never be replicated anywhere else because of all of those elements. Now, Argentina and the Vaca Muerta, where there is potential, it is a conventional oil area. They have infrastructure, they have some pipelines, and they have capability. It is owned by the government. Argentina is not your most stellar place to invest in terms of stability, but when Argentina is good, you can make a lot of money. It's just not good for very long. So you got to make a lot of money, get it out of there, and then get ready for the next collapse. And we've been in Argentina for 110 years, so we've seen it several times. But I think the real broader part of your question is a very valid observation, and that's that when supply and demand finally begin to get themselves back in some kind of reasonable balance, and you give the market this price signal, and I don't know what the price signal needs to be, whether it's $40, $50, $60, $70, there are going to be a lot of people that are going to go back to work, and they're going to start adding that capacity back again. So there is always, and that is, again, the nature of this business is the supply-demand signals are not perfectly aligned, and it's because of the lead times it takes us to get started on the supply side. So we'll get a price signal, and we'll be late, and the price will shoot up higher than it should because we're not meeting all the demand, and then all of a sudden it all rushes forward, and then we overrun the demand, and then here we go again. That is very much the nature of the oil and gas commodity business. The good news for the global economy and for consumers is you're going to have plenty of energy available for well into the middle to latter part of this century. And it should be delivered at a very affordable price that is stimulative to economic activity. And that's the good side. And we like that too. We want to see the demand go up. Because for us, that's really the long-term benefit to us is to have growing demand.
Thank you.
Just a heads up, this is a climate change question.
Okay.
So my name is Luke Brown, and I'm getting my master's in accounting. My grandfather graduated here from UT in '57 with a petroleum degree, and I respect him more than anyone in the world. He spent 40 years in oil, 10 of those years were for Mobil. And in him, I've even witnessed an evolution in his understanding of climate change. Can you plot for us your understanding of the evolution of your understanding of climate change from like when you first heard it in your career through to today?
Yeah. Well, I first heard of climate change and the risk of climate change in about 1995. The corporation has been studying climate change for a very long time, long before it was even part of the public vernacular. We have a corporate strategic research organization, which we have 4 research organizations, but corporate strategic research deals only with fundamental scientific questions. So they're not trying to invent things, they're not trying to develop things that the chemical company or the explorers can use. They're looking at very basic scientific questions, and so they have been investigating this a very long time. When the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change was first established now almost 20 years ago, our scientists were the only scientists from the oil industry to be part of the IPCC, and we still are today. So we have been members of the IPCC, we have authored many of their papers, we have peer-reviewed all of their papers. So we have been engaged in the understanding and the evolution of our understanding of climate change for decades. And we approach everything from a fundamental science question, okay? And so what I would tell you is the words like climate consensus don't mean anything to us. They ring hollow because that's an oxymoronic statement. You cannot have a scientific consensus. You can have a consensus around a scientific theory, but science, once proved, is science. It's like gravity. You don't need a consensus to say gravity exists. It's gravity. And climate is one of the most complicated, if not the most complicated, studies of science today going on. And it's going on broadly all over the world. When we were first studying it, not very many people were interested. We were working with a few academics, a few government scientists, but it now has evolved, and it's evolved in many ways because the technology available to us is so advanced to what we had a few years ago. A few years ago, we were looking at a handful of data points. Now we have the entire globe instrumented, from ocean buoys to satellites to air monitors we're getting data points by the millions now. And this is great because it's a science problem. The real challenge is building these models to try to predict the future. And in the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports, and most people have never read them, most policymakers have never read them, but if you read their reports, they have a science report on climate modeling. And my favorite chart is in there, and it's a chart of projection of future temperature against CO2 concentrations, and there's like 20-something models. None of them agree. Some of them say we're going to get cooler. Some of them say we're going to get really warm. And there is no model that has yet been developed that scientists would say is competent at predicting the future. Now, so that is the state of play of the science. What we have come to the conclusion over that long period of study, and I've spent time with the MIT scientists that work on the climate models that we've supported development of. I've spent time with the Stanford scientists. We have come to the conclusion that this is a serious risk. We don't know, and anyone who tells you they know beyond a shadow of a doubt is simply not giving you a scientific answer. They're giving you an opinion. So our view of it is climate change is a serious risk, and it's a risk that we need to manage. And we're in the risk management business. That's what we do. So how should we manage this risk? And how do you manage it from a scientific standpoint? And how do you manage it from the way you use energy? And how do you manage it from your energy sources? And how do you manage it with public policy? Those are all elements of how you want to manage the risk. And we are engaged and participate in every one of those areas. And where we get the most attention directed at us is on the policy side, because we engage in policies that recognize this is a serious risk. It does have uncertainty about its outcome, and people hate that word uncertainty. But that's just a fact. We really don't know for certain how this is going to turn out. Now, you're going to make policies that are going to have dramatic impacts on the economy, not just our economy, but the economy of the developing world. And what you got to remember is there's 1.7 billion people out there that still don't have electricity. They don't have running water. They can't refrigerate medicines. They can't refrigerate food. They would like to have access to energy.
My grandfather,
yeah, they'd like to have access to energy. And so they have an aspiration to lift themselves out of poverty. It's going to take energy to do that. So the grand challenge for us, for ExxonMobil and for the people in my industry is, how are we going to meet the world's energy needs in the future and do it in a way that is environmentally responsible and manages this risk of climate change? And it involves a lot of trade-offs. And the thing that I get most disheartened about in our public debate is that most of the public discourse is at both extremes. It's at both extremes, and that's not where the solution is going to be found. The solution is going to be found by thoughtful people coming into the middle and saying, yeah, it's a risk. I don't know how this is going to turn out. I got to do things that make sense for the long term, for the economy, and we got a lot of competing priorities, and we're just going to have to manage those. It's not a discussion that we can find very many people willing to have, and that is very disheartening to me.
Thanks for your candor. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. And I'm sorry for the rest of you standing up. Kenny is giving us the hook. We had promised Rex we'd be out of here at 6:25. We'd be done with this part of it. We should move on. But thank you very much for your candor, your time. I also want to thank you for all your support of both the Macomb School and University. You and Exxon have been huge partners of us, and we really appreciate it. So let me turn it over back to Kenny.
Thank you very much, Dean Hartzell and Mr. Tillerson. We appreciate you guys taking your time out of your schedule to speak with our students. I know that we'll be able to take your lessons about being open to new opportunities, safekeeping our integrity, and how even those who struggle in calculus can one day be the CEO of ExxonMobil and apply them into our own lives. As a token of our appreciation, the Undergraduate Business Council would like to present Mr. Tillerson with this personalized Stetson cowboy hat in recognition of your participation in the VIP Distinguished Speaker Series.
You betcha. My cows are going to love this.